I did not expect Hombre to feel theological, not in the churchly sense. No sermons, no altar calls, no grand declarations about salvation. Yet as the landscape widened and the stagecoach pressed forward into its uncertainty, I felt myself watching a spiritual drama unfold, one concerned less with belief than with orientation, less with doctrine than with the question wild grace never lets me escape. How shall a human live on the earth without becoming its wound? Westerns, as a genre, often function as liturgies of empire. They rehearse the same sacred myth, that the land exists for taking, that courage looks like domination, that civilization is proof of moral ascent. In this telling, extraction becomes virtue. But Hombre is restless inside that myth. Something in it hesitates. And that hesitation is where theology begins. John Russell stands at the film's spiritual center, though he would likely refuse such language. Raised among the Apache, yet marked by white society, he inhabits what I have come to think of, in wild grace terms, as a threshold identity. He belongs nowhere that power recognizes. Threshold people are dangerous to empires. They expose the contingency of what others call normal. Their very existence whispers that the dominant story is neither inevitable nor complete. What unsettled me most was not Russell's competence, but his refusal to perform the moral theater expected of him. The passengers want reassurance, gestures of loyalty, recognizable forms of masculinity, the familiar grammar of protection. Instead, Russell offers something quieter and far more threatening: clarity without comfort. Wild grace has been teaching me to recognize this posture. It is the stance of one who has stepped, however imperfectly, outside the extractor's cosmology. The extractor tells us, "You are separate. The world is resource. Security justifies violence. Ownership confers worth." Nearly every passenger aboard that stagecoach breathes this theology without knowing it is theological. That is the genius of dominant systems. They disguise metaphysics as common sense. Money becomes sacramental. Property becomes covenant. Whiteness becomes election. And fear, above all, becomes permission. What I witnessed in Hombre was not merely a physical journey, but a collision between two spiritual imaginations. One organized around control, the other around attunement. Russell watches the land because he knows it is not backdrop. It is presence, agency, weather with memory. The others see terrain. He reads relationship. Here, the film brushes against something wild grace holds at its core. To be human is not to stand above the web of life, but inside it, obligated by it. Yet I want to resist the easy temptation to sanctify Russell. Wild grace distrusts purity narratives. No one formed within colonial gravity escapes its pull entirely. Russell carries violence in him. He is capable of lethal precision. But what differentiates him is not innocence, it is restraint. Restraint is one of the most overlooked spiritual disciplines. Our culture celebrates expansion, assertion, acquisition. But restraint signals an awareness that one's power is not self-justifying. It gestures toward reciprocity. Watching him, I found myself wondering whether what we are really seeing is a form of relational masculinity. A masculinity not organized around domination, but around response. He does not seek conflict. Yet he does not flee responsibility. He acts when the moment demands it, not when his ego hungers for display. How rare that remains. The other men cling desperately to the husks of authority, titles, wealth, social standing, all the fragile scaffolding patriarchy erects to defend itself against the terror of vulnerability. But the desert strips them, and this stripping feels almost liturgical, an unwelcome initiation into reality. Wild grace often returns me to the idea that the earth is not merely our setting, it is the great destabilizer of human arrogance. Mountains do not negotiate. Heat does not defer to status. Exposure democratizes us all. In that sense, the landscape in Hombre functions like a silent green woman, not nurturing in the sentimental sense, but fiercely revelatory. It dismantles illusion. It tells the truth the passengers have spent their lives avoiding. You are not in control. You were never in control. There is a theological grief in that realization, but there is also liberation, because once the fantasy of mastery collapses, another possibility flickers, the possibility of belonging without ownership. Still, the film refuses reconciliation. Russell is never fully seen by those he aids. Their imagination cannot stretch far enough to include him. And so we are left with one of Wild Grace's most painful recognitions. Moral vision does not guarantee communal recognition. Sometimes the one who sees differently must act without being understood. I felt this most sharply in the film's meditation on obligation. The passengers believe Russell owes them protection, yet they have offered him no prior belonging. Their morality is transactional, a ledger disguised as virtue. Wild Grace presses me toward a harsher question. Is care still care when demanded by those who deny our humanity? Russell's response is neither sentimental nor vindictive. He helps, but not because they deserve it. He helps because he has chosen the kind of human he will be. This distinction matters enormously. When ethics flow from identity rather than approval, they become harder to corrupt. And yet, I cannot ignore the loneliness of such a path. To live beyond the dominant story is to accept a certain estrangement. Russell walks through the film untranslated, carrying a knowledge others interpret as coldness. But what appears cold may actually be fidelity. Fidelity to a moral ecology invisible to those still catechized by extraction. If the green woman had been beside me, I suspect she would have leaned close and murmured, "Empire fears those who no longer need its permission to be human." What lingers with me now is the film's quiet redefinition of heroism. There is no triumphal music swelling toward myth. What we witness instead is cost. Wild Grace insists that transformation is costly. Otherwise, it is merely aesthetic. Russell's choices are not gestures toward glory. They are movements toward coherence. He acts in alignment with what he sees to be true, even when that truth isolates him. Perhaps that is what holiness looks like outside institutional religion. Not perfection, but alignment. Not innocence, but integrity. By the time the credits rolled, I realized Hombre is less interested in the conquest of the West than in the exposure of a spiritual fault line, the chasm between a culture organized around taking and a way of being organized around relationship. The film does not cross that chasm. It barely names it, but it lets us see it, and sometimes seeing is the beginning of repentance. As I sat in the quiet afterward, one question rose in me, a question that feels unmistakably wild grace. In a civilization still addicted to extraction, what would it mean to become threshold people ourselves? People who measure worth not by possession, but by reciprocity. People who understand power as responsibility. People who know the land is not ours, yet choose, at last, to belong to it. I do not think Hombre offers answers, but it leaves a fissure in the old myth of mastery, and fissures are where grace seeps in.